So in this video, we will start the CRUD operation with JSP and Servlet. So we have created a table. So we will be inserting a data to database. Then we'll see how we can retrieve the data from database. And then we'll see how we can edit and update and delete. So these are the CRUD operation what we'll be performing with database using JSP and Servlet. So I'll go ahead and I'll create a new project for this, and I'll create a new dynamic web project, and I'll call this project name as JSP Servlet CRUD. So I'll be doing CRUD, so I'll click on this. Then I'll press on finish. So I have my project set up here. So first operation we'll be doing is create, that is inserting the data to database. For that I need to have a front-end file. So I'll click on new and JSP file, and I'll call this as user data.jsp, that is user data table I'll be creating in this form. So I'll click on finish and I'll have my user data here present. So now I'll change the title here to insert user data. Now in this I have to create a simple form. So first I'll create a center tag, within which I'll create a h1 tag, and I'll say insert user data. So once I have done this, so I'll go ahead and create a form, a simple form here. We'll create a simple form. So I'll say form, and in that form we'll have two attributes. One is the action and the other one is the method. So the method I'll specify is post here. So in post what happens? The data is not visible on the URL. Yes. Okay, so what are the buttons we need? So I need an input tag in which I'll say type as text, name as I'll give uname, that is username. I'll give a placeholder and I'll say enter user, enter name, and I'll say required, that is I need this data. Then in the next line I'll go ahead and I'll write I need input of type text. Oh, we need email, right? So if you go back and check our database once, so we have name, email and city. So for next will be email. So I'll say type as email, I'll say name as you email, and I'll give placeholder as enter email, and I'll give it required. So I'll give here required, that means the data is required. Okay, the last input I need is for my city. So I'll say input type equals text name, I'll give it as user city, and then I'll give placeholder as enter city, and I'll say required. After that, finally I need my submit button. So I'll say input type as submit, I'll give value as submit. So this is the simple form what I have created. We have to see the output, right? So I'll go ahead and I'll run this JSP file. Okay, so now I'm running the JSP file on the server. Okay, so you can see I have this form here. Okay, now if I have to place this in center, I can write the CSS part, but that we'll do that later, beautifying. Now we are just checking the CRUD operation. So I have name, email, city, and I have submit button. So on submit, the data should go to my database. So now we have finished the JSP part, that is the front end. So now we have to, this is the view part. Now we have to write the controller which will get the data. So I'll go to my Java resource SSC and I'll create a new package. So I'll call this package as com dot, or I'll simply give a name to this package as user controller. So all the controllers related code will be in this package. So I'll first go and refresh. Okay, and then I'll create a new servlet in this. So here I'll give servlet name as user data. Okay, and here I have errors again. So my Eclipse has not identified this as a Java's web dynamic project. So what I have to do for this, I have to go to my project, right click, I have to click on properties, then I'll go to project facets. In runtime I will check this Apache. So this then says the Eclipse that this project is basically an dynamic web project and will be run on Tomcat server. So I'll go and remove the comments so that I'll have space to write. So I do not require the constructor either. Neither do I require the do get method, because here you see what is the method I have specified, post. That means I'll be receiving data in do post. So I don't need do get. So now I have the controller ready. So this is my controller, that is the servlet user data. So the data will be coming here. So I have to copy this web servlet annotation, and here I have to paste it in the action. So this specifies that the data what will be entered in this form should go to this action. This is this servlet user data. So it will come here. So here I have to write the logic to fetch this three data, that is uname, uemail and uct. So it's very simple. I'll write string, then I'll say uname is equals to, or I'll just say string name is equals to, then I'll say request dot get parameter, and here I'll write the parameter name that I have to get. So what is the name of my input tag for username? It is uname, right? So this same uname I have to go ahead and I have to paste it here. Then I'll do the same for string email. I'll say request dot get parameter, and I'll specify the name from which it should get. So I'll say you email, and I'll say string city is equals to request dot get parameter, and here I'll say you city, that is I'm getting the user city information. Now once I get this three data, so first we'll see whether it's receiving or not. So I'll write print writer, and I'll write out is equals to request dot get writer. I'm sorry, it will be response dot get writer. So I have to include this library from java.io. So java.io.printWriter. Now after that I'll say out dot println, and here I'll specify name as, I'll just display name, then I'll say out dot println, and then I'll specify email, and I'll say plus email, then I'll specify out dot println, and then I'll specify city plus, I'll write city. So I'll just be displaying this data after receiving the data from this form. So we'll check this whether this application is running now. So we'll go ahead and run this so that we can verify if our application is working till now. Okay, so we have it here. So I'll enter my name, enter my email, and I'll enter city, and I'll press on submit. So once I press on submit, it is going to my servlet. My servlet is receiving the data, and you can see I have here name, email and city. So yes, my view is connected with my controller, that is my controller is getting the data. So next what we have to do in MVC architecture, once we have view, the data coming from view to controller, from controller it should go to model. So I have to create a model. So I'll create a package here, and I'll call this package as model. So all the models will be created in this package. I don't know why I do have a bug here that it always goes there. Okay, now I'll go ahead and create a class. This class I will call it as user. This is the user model what I have created, so I'll say user model. Okay, now this user model, I have to create the model for the user. So what are the data I'll be having? Private int id, but I won't be initially giving id while inserting. Why? Because this is an auto increment, but while retrieving it and deleting it I do require this. So I'll write private int id, private string name, private string email, private string, then I'll write city. Yes. Now after doing this I have to create getters and setters and toString methods. So rather than you writing, you can ask the Eclipse to do the work for you. So you can right click, go to source, and in source you will have generate getters and setters. So click on that, and then you will have to check on all the instance you want, and then you press on generate. So this generates your getters and setters method for you. Now I have to create toString also. So I'll say right click, source, and I'll say generate toString. By default it will have all the fields checked, so I have the toString also here. So now we have done the model part. So we have the view ready, which is going to Servlet. From Servlet I have to model this data. So how can I model? So it's very simple. I will remove this and I'll create an object for user model. I'll say user model, user is equals to new user model, and I have to import the package. So I'll right click and I'll say import user model. So you see it will import that package. Now after that I'll say user dot set name, and I'll specify the name to set. So I'll say user dot set email as email, and I'll say user dot set city, I'll say city. So you see how now all the data are stored in one object called as user. So I have to pass this user to my database so that it will use this object to get all the data, that is email, phone number, city. So this is creating a model. So you create a bean or a model and you model structure the data in this model. So all the data will be stored in this model class. So now if I'm sending it to DAO, I'll simply call this user object and I'll get the data, or I'll pass this as an parameter. So now our view part is done, controller and model part is done. Next we have to write the program to insert into database, that is our DAO. So for DAO I'll go ahead and I'll create a new package. I'll say new package and I'll write DAO. So all my database related code will be in this DAO package, and here I'll say new class and I'll say user DAO. So with respect to user, all database code will be written in this, and I'll press finish. So I have the class here user DAO. Now before inserting into database or writing any code, we have to use the driver to connect to the MySQL database. So we have to use a Jdbc driver. Yes. Now to use a Jdbc driver, we have to go and download it explicitly. We won't have that Jdbc driver pre-installed or getting it before. So we have to go ahead and download the PDF, zip file or the jar file. So how to download it? So you have to go to your browser and you just have to Google this, download Jdbc driver for MySQL, and click on enter. Then I'll get this first link. Yes, so I'll click on this first link, and here I'll have it. Now I will click on platform independent so that I get a jar file and I can include it. Now once I click on platform independent, I'll download the zip file. So I'll press on download. So this is how we download the Jdbc driver, that is the jar file, for in order to write the Jdbc code. Now if you don't have this, you cannot write the Jdbc code, you cannot do the connection. So you have to go ahead and you have to download this Jdbc driver. Without Jdbc driver you cannot do it. Okay, so now it is downloaded. I have it here. So I have to include that library. So I'll right click I'll say properties. Now in properties, in Java build path, I'll go to properties, Java build path. There you can see libraries, right? I'll click on libraries. Now in libraries, I have to add an library here. Okay, so I'll click on this libraries module path and I'll say add external jar. So I have to go ahead to my desktop. No, I have in download, so I'll download and I'll click on this MySQL connector jar and I'll press on open. So now it is been loaded. Yes, so I'll say apply and I'll say apply and close. And there is one more place where you can insert your library. We have to insert in web.inf. You can see this lib folder. So I have to drag that Jdbc file and I have to place it in this lib folder. Okay, I'm not able to, so I'll just copy this. I'll right click, I'll copy, and here I will paste it. So once I paste, I have the SQL here, and also in libraries you can see I'll have the library in this reference library. You can see this reference library. I have SQL connector jar file. Okay, so now that we have included our library, we can go ahead and we can write the JDBC program to connect to database and insert the data. So I'll create a method here. I'll call it public static and I'll say int of add user data, and here I'll say user model as user, that is that data what we have to get from user model. So I have to include this user model here, import it, and then I'll say int of result is equals to 0 and I'll return result, because once we are inserting data into database, once you're inserting you get number of rows inserted. So once you're calling this, when I'll explain you what method returns the data which will be storing in result. Now because this connection might give an error exception, so we'll use try catch. So I'll use a general exception and I'll say e.print stack trace. Then in try, I'll write class dot for name, specifying what driver I'm using. So com dot mysql dot jdbc dot driver. So this is the driver I'm using. Okay. Then I have to connect. So using interface connection, then I'll give the connection name as con is equals to from driver manager class dot I'll be using get connection method. I'll go ahead and I'll include connection. Okay, now before that I have to pass the URL and I have to pass all this data. So in URL I'll pass, you have to write along the string JDBC, then colon mysql, then 2/ localhost colon port number, that is 3306, and then slash I have to write the schema name, that is CRUD. So what was our schema name? So if you see here, my schema name is CRUD, right? So I'll write here CRUD, that is my schema name. What is the username here I'm using? It is root. And what is the password while installing MySQL database? You have written some password, right? So I'm writing the password here. So this is the password what I had written while creating SQL connection. So this was the root user, what password I have given. Now I have to import this from. Now while importing for connection you will get multiple libraries, but you have to only import from java.sql. If you import it from various library it won't work. You have to write only java.sql. So once I write java.sql, I'm done with importing. So now I can write the command for inserting it. Now before this I'll use a prepared statement, because I have to prepare a statement which is incomplete, so I'll be using prepared statement. So I'll say con dot prepare statement, and here I have to specify the statement that is to be prepared. So I'll import it from java.sql, and here I'll say insert into crud.user, in which I'm not inserting ID, I'm just inserting name, then email and city. So if you see here, I'm inserting only name, email and city because ID is auto generated. Then I'll say values, then I don't know the value, right? So I'll give question mark here, string interpolation, where later I'll tell what value should come and sit here. So I'll say PST, that is this prepared statement, dot set string. So at place of parameter index 1. So what this parameter index 1 means? At my first question mark here. So at the first question mark, what is the data to become? So user dot get name. So whatever is the user object I'll be calling, that will have a name, right? So get that name. Then I'll say PST dot set string, and I'll say parameter index 2, and then I'll say user dot get email, and then PST dot set string 3, and I'll say user dot get city. Yes, so here I have prepared the complete statement. These 3 values what were unknown, I have completed it. Once I have completed it, I can execute. So I'll say PST dot execute update. So it will execute an update, and after that this will return number of rows inserted. So if it is 1 row inserted, that will be stored in my result, and that is what I am storing. Or else initially result, if it is 0, that means not inserted, or else if it is 1, that means 1 row is successfully inserted. Now coming back to controller, I have to write the program that the data should go to the DAO. So from user DAO dot, I'll get a method called as add user, and I will pass this user object. So this user object what I created, I will be passing that to here, and once this is executed, this will return me an integer. So here back in my controller, I'll say int of result or int of insert is equals to this. Now if my insert is greater than 0, that means data is added. So what I'll do is, I'll say I have created print writer. Yes, so I'll say out dot print ln, and I'll say data added, else I'll say out dot print ln, and I'll say here error while adding data. Yes, so this is the program for inserting the data in database, where first I have my view where I have the form which goes to controller, which fetches the data, then organizes it in my model, and then calling the DAO. So it goes to my DAO, where my DAO is responsible, data access object. Only this class will have the code, whatever code is with respect to database will be written within this itself. So it will get inserted. Now if it successfully gets inserted, so I will have result 1, and that will be returned back to my controller, and based on that I can write any business logic here. So now that this is done, we can try and execute this. So I'll click on user data.jsp. I'll say run as, run on server. I'll say finish. So let's try to do this insertion. Okay, so now I have it. I'll say name as Aman, email as aman@aman.com, and I'll say city as Bangalore. So I'll press on submit. So once I'm pressing on submit, what am I getting? Data added. That means data is successfully added in database. So how will verify? Coming to this database, I have to press on refresh. Only if I press on refresh button, it will refresh the data. So if I press on refresh, so you can see now I have the data. So I have ID. Let me just go and enlarge this. I have email and I have city. So you see this data. Now this is done. So again I'll go ahead and I will run this user.jsp. So I'll say run as, run on server, finish. Then I'll say name Ram, email ram@gmail.com, and I'll say city, I'll say Chennai, and I'll press on submit. So what is that response getting by my controller? Data added. So to verify that, I'll go here and I'll press on refresh. So see, your data is loaded. I'm getting second ID. See, you see this ID is auto generated, that we have not written the code and it is auto generated. So ID 1, 2, then name Aman, then here next we wrote Ram and we are getting the data. So this is how we use MVC architecture to insert the data into database. So we have seen the first part, that is creating the data. So next video we'll see how we can retrieve the data from database.